Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the UX world. On the road today, for the first time ever in life, we have got two extra special guests with us today, Adam Banks and Konstantin Samoylov, ex-Google, currently at UX Study, and we're going to be getting into some real detail with these guys, all about UX Study and their mobile UX lab, UX in a Box, which is epic. And we're going to be talking all about how to create usability studies for voice applications and getting into detail about the tools, techniques, practices and stuff like that. Chaps, hello, thank you very much for joining me. Should we start by doing a little bit of intros and a bit of background in terms of your experience to date and how you've got to where you are with UX Study?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked at Google for 10 years. In my time there, I worked as a UX researcher, but in a previous life, I worked in audiovisual design. So I used to design cinemas and theatres and meeting rooms and the technology that runs those. Mm-hmm. So you put those two things together, and for a long time I built and designed all of Google's UX research labs, as well as being a researcher. Cool. I left a couple of years ago and we formed this company, and we now specialise in voice user research and building research systems and labs for people.
Fantastic.
So my story was, I worked in Russia for about 8 years. I gave lectures in user experience research. Then I created my own company, user experience research agency. Mm-hmm. Then I read everything I could read about Google, and I decided that I want to work for a big project. So I joined Google. I worked there for about 8 years, working on voice, Android, search, emerging markets, and multiple other projects. And this is how we met in Google, and this is how we kind of start conducting both voice studies and experiments with usability labs. Mm-hmm. Because voice studies have highest requirements for the flexibility of the usability lab, because you need to switch between people just talking, people talking to a device, people talking to a smartphone, people interacting with the website, and people drawing and do card sorting, and you need to do it everything on the fly if you want to share the actual experience with your product team. So Adam built all UX labs in Google, which is more than 50 around the world. We conducted more than 1,000 sessions there using all possible methodologies, and in the last couple of years in Google, a lot of companies, researchers from other companies started to come to our lab asking how we did that. And we always wanted to forward them or to point them to another company saying that just talk to them, they will build you a lab that works. And we're trying to find that company and just didn't exist. So we were kind of forced to leave Google and create that company. So we have it now.
Wicked. So when was that then? On what sort of time frame was it?
I left just over around 2 years ago now. Mm-hmm. So early 2016. Mm-hmm. And then you were just before me, weren't you?
Yes, a couple of months before.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we've been doing this ever since.
Yeah. And so tell us then a little bit more about UX Study and what it does and what you kind of spend your days doing at UX Study.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
We mostly focus on building UX labs, and again, there is a huge difference between building a lab as just equipment or a space or architecture, and building a research center where you can actually conduct a study and learn about user behavior. Because where we saw a niche in the market is that in most of the cases, if you go to a regular audio-video company, they will just build you either a small cinema with a lot of cameras around, or a big meeting room, again with a lot of microphones around. And the requirements are completely different.
So we focus on the user experience of using a lab.
Yeah.
We're not very tech focused. We don't come in and talk to people about, we'll use this camera and we'll do this and we'll do that. We can have those conversations with people, but when we first talk to a client, we talk about what methodologies are they going to be using? How do they want their space to feel? What type of participants will they have? What type of research are they doing? If you're building a lab where all you want to do is desktop research, because that's your entire project, then that needs to be a very different space to if you're doing VR research or voice research. What we try and do is build spaces that can work for everything in general, but you have to take a sort of higher level approach and not so tech-centred.
Right.
So we think of it in terms of how will the space be used, not what does it need to do.
Yeah.
We learned a lot while we did that. So basically, almost all assumptions we had in the beginning, they were wrong. Like, for example, when we started with conducting research on researchers, because a UX lab is probably the only case when the researcher is the user, right?
Yeah.
And we thought, for example, that the most important characteristic of the lab would be functionality. People would need like moving views, and people would need to change and kind of scale something. What we found is that by far the most important feature of the lab is the reliability.
Right.
Because both companies and researchers invest so much in conducting a study. If one study doesn't work, that doesn't mean that you can conduct the same study in a month or like in a week.
Yeah.
That means that a window of opportunity when your team waited for you is just lost.
Yeah.
So you missed a chance to improve your product.
Yeah.
And our estimation right now is that the best lab, like regular lab you can find, it works in about like 80% of the cases, and people spend about 30%. Researchers spend about 30% of their time on either technical issues or editing the video or preparing the lab before the study. You need to show up like an hour earlier to erase all the previous study to make sure everything works. So our goal is to minimize that time, and basically you can come to the lab 5 minutes before the study, you press the button, it works. As soon as you press the stop button, your video is ready. All their overlays, like introducing the participants, logos, opening, closing slides, everything is already done. And you can start sharing your videos and creating a report.
Yeah.
We try and take as much cognitive load off user researchers as we can. Whatever type of research you're doing, whether it's voice or whatever, we try and take as many jobs from you as possible and automate them and simplify them. And our goal is that the ultimate research system is a button, or maybe not even one button, we don't know. That we're heading in that direction.
Yeah.
Instead of overcomplicating things, we're oversimplifying things, or rather just simplifying how research is conducted and trying to standardise it for people as well. Our ultimate idea is that whether you're renting a lab from someone, or whether you have one in your company, or whether you're going somewhere, the way the lab works is similar.
Yeah.
If you go back 20 years, look at the web. Different sites worked in different ways. Different browsers worked very differently. It's taken us a long time to be more coherent across the industry about how things are built. On one level, it could be similar icons doing similar jobs. It could be affordances of things guiding you. But in the technology we use as researchers, it's still all over the place. Software is very disparate. Labs are very, very different and work in different ways and have different features. We want to try and help to standardise that across the industry.
And is that where your idea and concept for the lab in a box came from?
Yeah.
Yes, so we experimented a lot. You could still see the first prototypes under the desk. We can show like the huge like box there. And as we said previously, we learned a lot, and like most of our initial assumptions were wrong.
Right.
Like another example might be, when we started to work, we analyzed trends in UX research to make sure we're not focusing on what people did yesterday. We're focusing on what people do now and what they're going to do in the future. One of the trends, for example, is that researchers tend to have dedicated observers in the observation room. So there used to be 2 people. One of them talking to the participant, another one is taking notes. Now it's rarely the case. It's a luxury to have a second person. So that means that if you record something, you need to be able to, without being distracted from the participant, you need to be able to control the lab. And with traditional labs, it's just impossible. You literally need to crawl under the desk and change the cables or fix something. So our idea is that you should be able to conduct research without kind of breaking the contact with the participant and having full control over the lab. Like one click of the button, you know exactly how it works. You know that it's working at the moment, which is another issue. And being able to be as flexible as you need to switch between modes and share exactly the experience you feel in the usability lab with your product team. Otherwise, in many cases, it's just useless. You cannot come out of the lab and white robe saying that the truth is, the problem is that. Just people are not going to believe that.
Yeah.
There's so many opinions in the company already. Just having one more, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Sharing how it feels, this is where the strength is.
Yeah.
And something that came out of our research on researchers, which we still do quite a lot of, but we did a lot more of initially to start this project off and this company off, was people have a lot of trouble with audio. So if you're thinking about doing voice research, you need to do very high quality, trustworthy audio recording of what's happening in the space you're researching in, whether it's a lab or whether it's a corner of your office or whether it's at your desk. And one of the biggest problems people had is with audio, capturing it at good quality. So we focused very heavily on that in the system. And it's fully automatic, so it manages all the audio for you. And so far we have no issues in any of our labs, do we, that we build. And that helps a lot with voice research, obviously, but also in all research you want the audio to be good.
Yeah, 100%, yeah. What? Sorry.
I was going to say that, there are, again, as I said, there are a lot of things we learned. One thing was that convincing a company, like as an organization, to invest in a lab, it's a separate issue.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because if every researcher spent about 30% of their time on doing not research, like on technical work, where they're not trained to do that. Researchers shouldn't need to know how to edit videos or how to care about audio, for example. What's the frequency rate they need to use, and so on. So that means that if you have 3 researchers, one of them is a technician actually.
Yeah.
So every year you pay a salary for researchers, but one of them is not conducting any research. So that means that take a salary for a year. This is how much you can invest to improve the lab, to build a lab that actually works all the time. And you have 3 researchers again instead of just 2.
Yeah.
And it pays for itself within a year.
Yeah.
So there can be a very big return on investment for a research team to invest in their equipment. But it's usually hidden costs. The costs there, when we talk about researchers spending a third of their time on other things, that isn't a third of their week. It's little bits here and there that all add up. Yeah. It's spending 2 hours editing that one session you did. It's having problems and delaying studies by 2 or 3 hours because you're crawling under desk. It all adds up. But it's hidden. It's not obvious to managers or directors or the people who make hiring decisions. So they don't see this hidden cost, and therefore they don't necessarily appreciate the return on investment of a piece of equipment like we sell.
Yeah. So what is, in your experience, Adam, what is the kind of recipe for an ideal research lab?
It depends what you're doing, but the biggest thing is on focusing on the feel and the comfort of the space. It helps researchers to feel more comfortable, and it certainly helps your participants. One of the things that people don't think about is the journey your participant goes through to get to sitting there with you. Research should be as close to real as you can get in most cases, unless part of the study is being in an unreal scenario, but that's another issue. So the ideal study is being invisible in the real world, but we know that's impossible. Most studies are still taking place in labs, so what you need to do is to do whatever you can to make it feel a bit easier. We go to a lot of spaces where, a lot of existing labs, where it looks like an office and they've plonked a computer in the corner with a camera. That doesn't help your participant to feel in any way at ease. Put sofas in there, put curtains up, make it feel a bit nicer. And think about your participants' arousals along their journey. Let's say you're a company in central London and you're bringing people in for a basic usability study. Participant number 1 has come to an unfamiliar place, travelled by a route they don't normally take, come to an office they don't know, are surrounded by people they don't feel that comfortable with. And you sit them down and say, right, do this thing as if you normally would. How are they ever going to do that? And the space itself and the feel of the space is very important. The other thing is not having technical problems. Make it so that the researcher can focus on that participant and their job is just to do the research. So they can just say, right, start recording, and then they don't need to worry about it, it just works. They trust the system, it's reliable. And they can then focus on the research they're doing and on the participant. Again, that helps the participant to be more at ease, because the researcher can be just like you and I are now, just talking to each other face to face, instead of the researcher constantly going, hold on, I need to go and do a thing, I need to go and check over there.
Yeah.
We've all sat and observed studies where that happens, and it's not good for anyone. It's not good for the observers or the researcher, but it's certainly not good for the research itself.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the kind of research lab.
Yeah.
And once you've got somebody kind of into the lab, let's take a voice kind of application that's being developed. There's a nice lab. We've got one of these UX lab in a boxes, which we'll talk about and show a little bit more of in further detail a bit later on. Once you've got them there, if you've made them feel kind of comfortable and what have you, what would then the process be? Or does it even start before then? What's kind of the general process for user research in a kind of voice environment?
So there are many sides of that. So one of them being, when we conduct a study with something we can see, voice is invisible, right? So, which is much even more complicated comparing to traditional UX studies. When we conduct a study with something we can see, we can definitely see the participant's action. Like for example, if I click this button, you cannot see what I thought about that, but at least you can see my reaction.
Yeah.
Next time when I click the different button, that means that I thought about something differently, right? Mm-hmm. With voice, if I said almost the same thing slightly differently, does it mean that my mental model changed, or I see the product differently, or just I decided to change the way how I address that thing?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
So that means that it's extremely important, all the small details, because if we change just one factor, it can significantly change the process itself, and we can start studying things that are actually not representative. Like for example, the easiest way to emulate voice is just to have a person in front of you saying that, just imagine that I'm not a real person, I'm a virtual assistant, and what would you like me to ask? And we try to do that, it just doesn't work, for multiple reasons. And the main one being is that before you even ask me anything, we are biologically programmed to read people faces, right?
Yeah.
So you hear my voice, you know that I'm a person, you immediately have a mental model completely different from what the mental model you would have if you talk to just a black box on the front of the table, right? So we can conduct that studies as long as we can. We are not going to get any real interaction, and we're not going to learn anything about how you would talk to the system. So the first important thing is that you need a prototype that reels and sounds like a system you're testing.
Yeah, yeah.
The second thing I would say, it's another trend that we found during research studies when we conducted research on researchers, is that even 5 years ago we tended to focus on just one media. For example, there was a study for a desktop or laptop or a mobile study. Now in most of the cases we just follow what people do, and people tend to switch. You start your user journey on Alexa, for example, then you continue to track that story on your mobile device, and you go to work and you see the big screen.
Yeah.
That means in the usability lab we need to be able to support that same level of flexibility, and you need, combining with the previous trend, is that you're only one researcher, you don't have a support in another room. You should be able to follow the user journey in the usability lab without distracting neither you or the user from the process.
Yeah.
So I would say this is another very important requirement for usability labs in general, and specifically for voice.
Another important thing is to be able to prototype early. So to do your testing, you need people to, ideally you want people to believe they're talking to a real system, but you need them to, you need as a researcher to be able to get that system to do what you want. So you want to be able to control it. So one way we do this is we developed our own Wizard of Oz software, where someone could be sat here and we could give them anything and tell them it's a new device. We could say, oh, this is a bit like an Alexa or an Echo or a Siri or something, and we can control it remotely. So we can have it respond exactly as we want.
Right.
And we can either pre-program responses, or you can have someone in another space, in the observation room or literally anywhere really, watching remotely, controlling the device.
Huh.
And people are, whenever we do these studies, one question we ask participants at the end is their feeling about the system and how they responded to it and what they got from it. And hardly anyone ever questions if it's real.
Huh.
We probably get 1 in 100 people who even say, is it a real thing? Everyone else just assumes it is because they talk to it and it talks back in a computerised voice. Why would they not think it's real? They don't know that one of us is in the other room frantically typing away to respond. And even when you make mistakes, people are so used to Google Now and Siri going wrong that they're fine with it because they go, oh, it's like the other things, it's fallible.
Yeah. So do you genuinely just use like a sort of like small speaker or something, or do you use a Google Home or an
It depends what type of studies we're doing and which client we're working with. If someone's working on something that will ultimately be coming through Alexa, we use Alexa. We put an Echo on the desk and we remotely controlling it using our software that we've created. In other studies where people just want to use a voice interface, we either use a phone, because we have apps you can run on a phone where you remotely control what the app speaks, and just tell them this, and we can rebadge it. So let's say we're working for client X, we can make it look like an app that client X had built, but it's really just our reskinned standard testing app. But often it's just a Bluetooth speaker on a desk. What we sometimes do is the brand of the speaker we're using, we get them to use that name. So if it's made by Sony, we just say, this system's called Sony. And they just interact with it. The trigger word is Sony. And they just think that's triggering it, just like when you say Siri. But it's not. It's one of us in the other room responding to that. So that's a way to very quickly prototype ideas and test small changes. Because it allows you to test different language or different lengths of responses, or even the way the voice sounds. Because even within existing systems, if you write a skill for Alexa, you have some degree of control about how Alexa speaks. And with the Google Voice API, you have a lot of control. You can make it sound, it's usually the standard female computer voice, but you can make it sound very different. So we do testing with people who are interested in, one example is we were doing retention testing with a company where they wanted to see how much information can participants keep when we talk to them. Because a very big thing in voice research is the bandwidth between you and the system. If you think about the development of computer technology going back to, let's start with what we call modern computers in, let's say, the 60s and 70s. The system was usually text input and text output. It gave you a very little amount of information and you gave it a little. Fast forward to the, early 90s when the web started to be a real thing, suddenly there were loads of information. It was all over the place. Fast forward another 10 years, resolutions get higher, the way we present information gets bigger, and we're still giving people lots and lots of visual information. So the bandwidth between the person and the system is extremely high. With voice, it's now tiny again. It's really low. So one area I think there isn't a lot of research into, and we're doing some with companies, but I don't think there's much academic research here, is how much can people retain with short responses or longer responses or even longer. Let's say you ask a question and we grab a response from Wikipedia. If I've typed that into Google, it's fine to give them the Wikipedia page because the person will pause it visually, take the information they want and make decisions on the fly without even realising. With a voice interface, if the only responses we're giving are audible, we have to be making those decisions about what to tell them as an answer to that question. Simple questions are easy. So when people use Siri for questions, if they ask, what were the dates of the First World War? And I know that in itself is debatable, but it will go, let's say it will go to a knowledge graph system, find the dates and tell you. But if you say, what are the causes of the First World War, what does it say? How do we give them that answer in a way that it's going to be useful to them through just the speaker on the phone or on the system we're using? So we do a lot of research into that area about how do we respond to people when they're using their voice only with this very limited bandwidth.
Because people, isn't it? They reckon that people have something like they can retain 7 things at any one time in working memory or something like that.
Well, that theory came from psychological studies where you have 7 numbers, and then if you have 8 numbers, then less people, then basically the bell curve is on 7.
Right.
But you think about when you saw the numbers, do you still remember where you were? Like at what room it was? Were you alone or not? What color was the number was? What font it was? What was the background? You still remember all those things, right? So it's really about kind of chunks of information that you can recall.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can merge different bits in one chunk, and it still remains one chunk.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of how you combine information, how you present that, and especially with voice. As soon as especially after Alexa was launched, suddenly everybody assumed that the future is just voice without screen. It's like all users became blind somehow. Now it's getting better, mostly because Alexa is launched the new version with a screen.
But even very early on, Amazon very quickly created the companion app.
Yeah.
They very quickly realised, we do need a visual interface to go with this, and it needs to be somewhere, so we'll just use the screen everyone has in their pocket.
Yeah.
Now they've taken that same thing and put it on the device itself.
Yeah.
So they're sort of stepping back away from voice only and sticking with voice first, but that initiates the thing you want to do, and you then switch back to visual anyway.
Right. Is that what you've seen through the studies and things like that? Because you mentioned at the start, Konstantin, about doing studies on different devices. So someone might either start on an Echo and then go onto the phone. Is that kind of what you've noticed through doing research? Is that people are pairing devices together and trying to get information from lots of different places rather than just the smart speakers?
It depends on what kind of interaction people have, because one thing we notice is that there's a huge difference between voice search and voice actions. With voice search, it's still a traditional type of interaction when you get some information through just the audio channel, right? It's still your responsibility to decide what to do with that information, and if something goes wrong, it's you made the decision, right? So nobody else to blame. With voice actions, though, you delegate the responsibility of the action which affects you directly.
Yeah.
So if something goes wrong, there is a person or a system to blame. It's that thing is bad, right?
Yeah.
So search-wise, people do everything. People use like any device they can use. Action-wise, voice action-wise, it's a completely different story, because there are so many factors there, like trust, for example. Trust in brand in general, trust in this specific device, trust in this specific feature in that device, which is completely different. And first of all, it's very difficult to evaluate for people. Then people change their mental model of what they trust, what they don't trust, what they understand, what they don't, how to use it, how... Another problem is that when the system is updated, you have no idea that it was, right?
Yeah.
So you tried something yesterday, it didn't work. Why are you going to do it today?
Yeah.
You don't know. Or the other way around. You tried something yesterday, it did work. Now they updated the knowledge graph and it didn't.
Yeah.
And what conclusion can you make from that?
Yeah.
People's willingness to use voice actions often relates to how much they trust the delegation. And that often relates to the severity of it not working.
Right.
So let's use the example of calling someone. If you say to your phone, call Steve, and it calls someone else instead, how severe is that?
Yeah.
If I do a search and say, who's the president of Uzbekistan, but it gives me the president of another country, who cares? I just do it again.
Yeah.
So that in voice questioning, the delegation, most people tend to be okay with that, because the potential negative outcome is usually zero or near zero.
Yeah.
But calling someone is big.
Yeah.
Calling the wrong person is a problem. And that's just one example of calling.
Yeah.
What if I'm emailing someone? If I say, email my friend to tell him I'm going to quit my job. What if it emails your boss to tell him you're going to quit your job and you haven't told your boss yet?
Yeah.
The potential outcome there is very severe.
Yeah.
So people's willingness to delegate actions through voice often relates to the severity of it not working.
Yeah.
And which obviously feeds into their trust in the system.
And does that then have an impact on, because I read something a few days ago which was, I think it was something to do with the amount of people who've tried Siri and something didn't quite go to plan and then they've just not bothered with it again, even though, as you say, it might have been updated and other things might be working. Do you think that might have something to do with that, in terms of if you try something and the severity of it might be dangerous or what have you, then you might not ever try it again?
Absolutely. I remember we had a participant who we showed how to use the voice assistant inside her phone, and she didn't know about that.
Right.
And she said, "Oh, it's fantastic! I'm going to show to my daughter how to use that tonight, and she will love it. I'm going to talk to all my coworkers during the week, and on the weekend I'm going to a pub and I'm going to talk about that thing to all my friends. They don't know either."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, that's great. That means that we now we can test how people onboard the process, kind of people who haven't used them." And we said, "Are you going to use this system yourself, like, for in real life?" And she said, "Absolutely not." They were like, "Why? You just liked it like a second ago." And she said, "It's because my life is important for me. I just tried it twice, and at once it just didn't work, and I don't know why." And there's a huge difference between search, when you just have information just for your information, and then you delegate an action, and the system does something to you.
Yeah.
Her example was that she forgot a birthday of her partner, and she didn't want that to happen again. So she wanted some system to remind her about it for like a couple of days before. And if you say, let's say Siri, Siri, remember about this day, or remind me about this specific day, you have no idea how it's going to happen. Even if the Siri says okay, and it looks like it in the studio, what exactly that means? Is it going to send you a text message or email, or is it going to ring the phone, or is it going to be a small notification somewhere that you can easily miss? So that means that that was the moment when we understood that there is a huge difference between a search intention and the search process and the action process. It's just completely different stories.
Yeah.
And I think this is where most of the big companies, including Amazon and Apple and Google, they still use the idea of the old product. Is that the search infrastructure is the same. So, and in many cases, the algorithm behind the virtual assistant is the same as voice search. So that means that it works the same on the user side, which is not the case.
Yeah.
One comment we hear a lot from companies is, we've made this voice thing as part of our thing, but people aren't using it. Why aren't they using it? And all they've done is voicified what they already do, because they think it's the same mental model. People will use it in the same way, they'll just use their voice.
Yeah.
And it's not. If you let's take a very basic example of a website with buttons that do things. If you show people that, their emotional state is important, their context is important, everything is important, but they still only have those buttons to choose from.
Yeah.
So all those other things going on, the affordances that they see or feel, their emotions, still only affect their choice between what you give them. Turn that into a voice interface, and suddenly they can basically do whatever they want and say whatever they want and ask whatever they want. And unless you nail them down in the old idea of like the IVR, the interactive voice response system, press 1 for, press 2 for, if that's all you're going for, you can sort of replicate your system, but what's the point of doing that? It's going to take them longer to do it with their voice. What people should be going for is a way for people to state an intent and tell a system what they want. Whereas a lot of companies think we just need to voicify what we do on the screen, and it just does not work that way.
Yeah. So it seems as though you do quite a lot of. We've kind of touched about behavioural stuff. So the way that people would react to Siri, and the maybe it's trust or lack thereof in that respect, and the differences between how people might use a screen and a voice thing. When you're conducting these studies, are you looking for stuff like that, which is you just seem to have replicated your IVR system, functionally it doesn't work? Or are you looking predominantly for behavioural things like that trust issue with Siri, or does it completely depend?
I think it depends, but what Kostya was just talking about is a lot more important to the way people use voice systems. People want to be able to interact more naturally with them, so they don't want to be forced down alleyways. When people start, if you take a person who's never used a voice assistant before, there's a very common trend, which is they don't really know what it can do, so they ask it a question. Often it's something very basic and searchy. What's the capital of Paris? Of France, sorry. And they get the answer, Paris. And then they go, oh, this is good. So their trust in the system and their interest in it shoots up. They ask it something else and they get an answer. How far is it from Land's End to John O'Groats? They get an answer. They go, oh, this is good. Trust goes up. Then they ask it something slightly more complicated. It falls over, doesn't give them the right answer or can't answer or says, I'm sorry, I don't know. Their trust goes through the floor and they may never use it again.
Right.
That's far more important, those areas of interest in any voice system, really.
Yeah.
We're conducting a very interesting study at the moment. We are talking to real human assistants, usually people supporting their bosses remotely.
Yeah.
When people sit somewhere, or maybe in a different country. But if you have a question, you can either email that person or call them, and he will be able to reply and help you. And we try to understand how people, human assistants, how they build trust, what kind of tasks they can and cannot help, and what people receiving the service, what they need to change. And I think the most important thing we learned is that initially we thought that the voice assistant is a thing that just does what you do, what you say.
Yeah.
You say create a message, it creates a message. You create a reminder, it creates a reminder. And this is what kind of bad assistants do, because that means that you still need to think about, you still need to remember that.
Yeah.
It's still your responsibility to send a message.
Yeah.
If you say that it's different message or to the wrong person, it's still your mistake, right?
Yeah.
With a good human assistant, you just explain what you want to do. Like, for example, you say, I want to be healthier. And next time when you see it at 1 a.m. watching series, you say, switch to another thing. The good assistant should say, no, you should really go to bed. Because you wanted, like, there is a higher level goal that you wanted to achieve.
Yeah.
And that actually changes everything. That's a completely different story, because that means that the system needs, or the person needs to understand what you actually want, what's your end goal.
Yeah.
And then, instead of just obeying everything you say, it should guide you to that goal in the best possible way.
Yes.
Right? And that actually solves, I think, the biggest problem that people have right now. Like, right now probably we talk to each other and you have 100 different things competing in your mind for your attention. Different questions, things you need to do later today, and so on. So right now it's not a problem when you don't have enough information or you don't know what to do. It's the opposite. There are too many things in your head that you need to pay attention to. And a good assistant can take a couple of things from your head. You don't need to worry about them at all. Like, let's say that person takes care about your meetings. If something goes wrong, if something might go wrong, they will let you know. You don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
So that is a real assistant.
Yeah.
And it's not even close to any real product that are launched at the moment, because all of them work on the assumptions that it's still your responsibility to think, to remember what to say, when to say something, what to say, and be in charge and being responsible for the outcome.
Yeah.
So we're conducting that study to understand, talking to real humans, to understand how the system might work and how to change from just voicifying apps to a real entity that can actually help you with your most important problem, like over-complicated life, rather than just adding one more thing there.
Yeah, so that's quite interesting now. So it's kind of, and you're right, you almost need to, you're the one just doing the planning, if you're planning meetings via Google Home or what have you, and then that's just kind of storing it, isn't it, as opposed to doing the whole management of it for you.
It's the difference between a voice interface and a voice assistant.
Yeah.
The interface just does what you tell it.
Yeah.
Its voice just becomes another input method. It just becomes a keyboard or a mouse or any other way of interfacing with the system. A voice assistant is much more like what Kostya was describing with a real human. So at the moment you can say to Siri, set a reminder to send flowers to my mum on March, whatever Mother's Day is.
Yeah.
With a human, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't phone up your real assistant and say, set a reminder to... You'd say, don't let me forget to send my mum some flowers.
Yeah.
And they would know what that means. They would interpret it, and they would do a set of actions to ensure that your intent was achieved.
Yeah.
We're very, very far away from that with anything that's out there at the moment. Even the best in the world, Google Home or Siri or Alexa, is worlds away from that. But people expect it to be that.
Yeah.
A lot of people buying these systems and starting to use them expect to be able to do that, and they just can't.
Yeah.
So it's much more interesting to be doing research in that area about what do we need to do to bridge the gap between the voice interface and the voice assistant?
Yeah.
And what steps over the next 10 years do we go through?
Yeah.
It isn't just about pointing an AI at it. It's about teaching the AI what things mean and how they mean, but not if this then that. We're never going to get anywhere near a real assistant through in Java doing if this happens do that, if that happens do this. It has to be something more than that. We have to be able to teach the system to interpret people's intentions, which is much more complicated.
And it's very interesting that big companies that do have resources to do that, to work in that direction, they have like that a dog in that fight already. Like, for example, take any big company, Amazon, for example, right? When they launched Alexa, it didn't sell you anything. It was just an interesting thing to try, right? It could play music, create reminders, could ask questions, and so on. Right now, as soon as they integrate much closer to with the biggest business model, what are they going to do with advertisement, for example? If your personal assistant tells you, oh, you need to buy that thing, and if you even suspect that the advice came because somebody else paid Amazon for advising that thing, it's not your personal assistant anymore, right? Why are you going to trust it and follow any advice for that thing? Or take Google, for example. Where is the place for advertisement in the voice interaction? When you say, for example, I want how to get to a place, for example, and if it suggests you to take Uber or any other service, is it because that service pays Google for doing that? And again, it's not your voice assistant anymore, and the place for the advertisement is just questionable. And it's the same story for everywhere. Like, for example, with Apple, if you ask a question and the best answer is not to use an Apple product and to use something else, is it really going to recommend that? So that means that, again, it's our personal perspective, is that companies that have resources to try to kind of match that gap and work in a different way, they are the companies who are least interested in that, because you make your billions now, and you can take a risk and create something new that either kind of stop that revenue at the moment, right now, or you can just pretend that you do small steps in the old with the old product, kind of voicifying things and moving it slowly and just waiting till somebody else does something, and then you have to kind of to bridge that gap.
Is that what you're seeing mostly then, is companies taking really small sort of baby steps and dabbling, as opposed to going at it whole?
It's easier to do that for them. They can do that research. They can say, what does it take to voicify what we already do? How do we do that? That you can sit down and write a plan for how to do it. To do the bigger task of figuring out how will people really want to use these systems, you have to be willing to go down blind alleys. You have to be willing to make a lot of mistakes in your research, because you can't get everything right first time. If you're just voicifying a thing, there's a fairly clear path to do that. If you're trying to actually figure out the best possible way for people to use their voice with your product, that's a much bigger, much longer term project to even start figuring that out. So people aren't doing those bigger, longer term bits of work. They're focusing on voicifying what they already do, because that's how companies tend to work. They want to have a project, say it will be done in 6 months and we will have an outcome from it. They don't want to say, let's try this, let's play around in this area. That's much more difficult to do within a corporate structure.
And again, it's understandable, because companies weren't born. They were created to support a specific product. They have values and guidelines, and it's almost like a religion in big companies, is that this is what we do, this is what's important. But it seems that voice, specifically voice assistant, is a disruptive technology. So you're not talking about the old product anymore, you're talking about something else. And you try to squeeze a different product with different values, different characteristics in the old organizational structure that was built for something else. And it's much like, think about Alexa, for example. As far as I remember, there were more than 20,000 skills in Alexa. Just imagine you wake up tomorrow and there are 20 million skills in Alexa. How is it going to change your life? For the organization, it's the path just updating the skills is just much easier than trying to figure out what's your intention and taking risk and trying to make that gap smaller, right?
Yeah.
It's much like, for example, if you're a manager in a big organization, you want to plan promotions of your people. Just say that, this year we're going to launch another 20,000 actions, and this is how great it is, and we're getting somewhere, right? Organizational-wise, kind of plan-wise, it's great, but it's not what disruptive innovations need. They need taking a risk and breaking the old structure.
Yeah. So what we're seeing when we talk to companies about voice is they want a definite thing they can do.
Yeah.
They want to create an Alexa skill.
Yeah.
They don't start with the question of how do we allow our customers or our users to engage with their voice or their product. They start with what can we do? What's the tech response that we can give? The tech response is create an Alexa skill. Yeah. So they create an Alexa skill without thinking, is that what we actually need? So we're seeing a lot of people wanting to come into this world, but not into the voice world and into the voice assistant world, but not really knowing where to start.
Yeah.
So they just choose from one of 4 options and they start there, which is understandable, but then often they come and talk to us because it doesn't work, and they want us to help them figure out why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Why is no one using our Alexa skill? And our answer often is because people don't tend to use Alexa skills. They're not widely used. Yeah. Some are, a small number that are incredibly well known and useful are, but of the 20,000 or 20 million, I don't know how many there are now, most of them no one ever touches, because it's just a tech response to a problem that might not need a purely technological response. People need to be thinking in a different way about how they move into the world of voice.
Yeah. So if a company came to you then in that exact scenario and said, we think that there's something in this voice thing, we want to kind of have a bit of an exploration, we want you to build us an Alexa skill, or we want you to research or test our Alexa skill or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a company that wants to explore voice. What would your kind of thought process be, and how would that look if you were to go through a kind of piece of research with them to figure out what problems they have and how it might be solved?
So we are in a lucky position when we have a second part of the business, which is like the biggest part at the moment, building labs. So that means that we don't need to take all the projects and all the clients. So when the client comes and says, I want to build an Alexa skill, we usually start with, okay, what do you want to achieve? If it's just a marketing campaign that we want, now we were voicify it and we want to put it somewhere like on a banner somewhere. We usually don't do that.
We'd normally refer them to companies that build Alexa skills and say, that's what they do. We don't do that specific bit of work for you. We will investigate things for you.
So our question would be, what exactly you want to achieve product-wise? If you want to, for example, if you have any issue with the product, like for example, people don't know about some features, or you suspect that there might be use cases when your product might be useful but people don't use it, we can conduct a study and understand why it is the case. And in most of the cases, it's a combination of both voice, graphic user interface, and learning, and different ways to send the information to user and to teach them about how to use the thing. And it's much more complicated than just we'll build that skill. If you say that, we'll do this.
Cool. So you kind of touched on a few challenges just then. What are some of the other challenges that you've found, either in user behaviour towards these voice things, onboarding you mentioned earlier on, or even if you found any, you mentioned some technical limitations and stuff like that. Is there any other sort of challenges, and what would the solutions be to some of those?
One is keeping people using these systems. A story we very often hear when we start, let's say we're doing a piece of work with a company, we recruit participants who are users of that system, they've never used voice before, or often if they have used any kind of voice interface, keeping them using it is incredibly difficult. Going back to what we said before about trust and people's trust dropping through the floor, their usage of the system often does as well. So a very common story is we'll meet someone, start talking to them about what they do with their Alexa or something like that, and often they say, I used to use that, and they don't now. Or they say, I bought it to do XYZ, But all I really do now is set timers in the kitchen. Or one very, very common, and I'll be honest, this is our main uses of Alexa in our office, is just to play music.
Yeah.
It's a very nice interface for playing music. You put your Spotify account in or whatever you use, and it's a nice way to just say, play some Erasure, play whatever. But people don't go beyond that.
Yeah.
So a big task for anyone trying to get their users using voice through one of these existing systems or directly into their product is keeping them using it. Because very often you put a lot of work in to create your interface or your skill or whatever. People use it 3 times and then never ever think of it again. So a very big task is figuring out what can a company do to create such a good and nice and interesting experience for their user that it's pleasant enough that they want to keep doing it.
So that was an example of product-wise. I can give a couple of examples research-wise and organizational-wise. So research-wise, there is a big question about what do you need to research and how often you need to do that, and what do you compare your product with a competitor, or do you just keep researching and improving that thing? And one thing we learned is that as soon as voice, and specifically anything related to voice actions, is so new, people just don't know what to expect. We just kind of, as developers, we just starting to learn what it means to talk to something that is not a human, right? And I can give a couple of examples. One might be, we had a product. We just fooled around with different responses that the product can give using the With of Us interface, because you can easily change anything you want and it sounds real. So the 2 options were, the first one was, when you create a message, the system said, do you want to save it? And the second option was, you create a message and the system says, what do you want to do? So for me as a person, it's almost the same thing. There's literally no difference. Like if you said that, I would treat it absolutely different because I know what you mean. What we saw, how people reacted was that in the first case, as soon as the system asked yes/no question, people assume that the system is not smart enough and can understand only like one utterance.
Right.
So after that, people started to say, no, what do you want to change? Text. How do you want to change that? Add this sentence. Do you want to change something else? Yes. What do you want to change? In the second option, as soon as the system asked what do you want to do, people assume that it's smart enough to understand when I just speak to it. And people said, change the text, add the sentence, and then change the recipient and send it to ours. So for us it was just a revelation, because this was such a subtle difference in terms of how we present information, which completely changed the user mental model. And we didn't expect that, because, and I would say that nobody would expect that, because we just don't know what to pay attention during the voice interaction. And research-wise, I think one of the difficulties is that you usually don't have that framework for just continuous research. Keep asking the questions instead of just responding to your product team who said, we have this specific research question, is it yes or no? Should it be male voice or female voice? This is what we want to learn. And by answering those questions, you miss the 99% of everything that really affects the product. So it's for research-wise. Organizational-wise, what we talked before is that when you create, or when you conduct research for a specific product, you either work with your product team or you work with a client. And for them, it's very difficult to change their values, because most of the organizational values, they're not obvious. Like for example, some Google states that they openly say that speed is extremely important, because in the web search, speed is really important. That means that it's kind of a religion in Google at the moment. You need to everything do as fast as possible. Like this is the metric that almost like #1 metric for everything. And
in lots of companies across the tech industry, speed is the most important thing. We have to do it faster. How do we do things faster? And it's just kind of an unquestioned given that speed is the most important thing.
If you can fight the latency, you're good. How do you define speed in voice? Like for example, if you say, if you wanted to create a reminder about next podcast tomorrow? How would you say that? Let's say if I'm your personal assistant.
If you were my personal assistant and I wanted to set a reminder to play me a podcast tomorrow, I would say, whatever it is, Alexa, play VUX World tomorrow afternoon.
Got it. Was it fast enough?
That was probably a bit too fast.
It's another question too. Like, it's your perception of the trust of the system, right?
Yeah. So that would make me think that it probably didn't get it because it was too quick to respond to me.
Yeah,
But you don't know. You have no idea.
Yeah.
So speed wasn't that important in that interaction.
Yeah.
The type of response and the content was probably more important.
Yeah.
Another question is that what happens tomorrow? How exactly I'm going to operate? And the full task is when you start saying your intention, and when the intention or the goal actually was achieved. The goal is tomorrow.
Yeah.
So if I said got it right now, it looks fantastic. But if I don't do anything tomorrow, and I do tomorrow in the way that you don't expect, or in the wrong way, that means that speed right now doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
It was actually a bad thing. It would be much easier, better if I said, sorry, do you want me to send a message, or do you want to create a reminder?
Yeah.
Which increases the latency, and we define latency in technical terms dramatically.
Yeah.
And it just goes against the core value of the organization.
Yeah.
And organizational-wise, I would say this is a very difficult thing, because if you really think that you want to create a disruptive innovation, you cannot be guided by religious values that are completely true, and they're created for a good reason, but for a different product in different situation.
Yeah. Okay, so if it's alright with you, we'll do a really quick fire thing. There's a few things I kind of really wanted to speak to you about based on the conversation we're having on LinkedIn. So I'll do a really quick fire thing, 5 minutes, and then we can wrap up, and then we'll get into the demo of the lab in a box, which for everyone watching on YouTube will be epic, and we'll try and explain what's going on for the people who are listening to the podcast. It'll be a really good feature towards the end of this podcast, a bit of a reward for all you lot who've paid attention so far. Okay, so some of the things that Konstantin, you mentioned that you've been working on at Google, which I thought would be really interesting to kind of define for those people who are, either just getting into user research in the voice kind of space, or who, wanted to do research themselves. So some of the things that you mentioned that you were working on was design sprints. So you were organising several design sprints on VUX. So really, really briefly, what does a design sprint look like for you when you were at Google? What does that sort of look like?
So in this case, I rather helped the design team to organize design sprints. There were a couple of design sprint masters in Google in London, Mark Paulin and Peter Hodgson. So my role was basically, when we planned and conducted several design sprints, we found that you can bring different people to the room. You can change the context. You can make them think and feel differently, right? The same limitation is that it's still the same people who worked on the product, and they still use the same assumptions and still the same vision of the product. You can try to change that, but it's pretty difficult to do. So we started to think what can be done there, and one thing we realized is that we learned so much from user experience research studies that would benefit the design sprints a lot. So we experimented with merging design sprints and UX research studies. Like, for example, the first day, everybody come together, they worked on a new product, a new idea. Then at the end of the day, researchers, in that case it was me, we thought about how to organize next day in the morning, how to organize a very quick and reliable study that would get some feedback about that imaginary product in the first day. And in most of the cases you can do that. You don't need to build a prototype. It can be just smoke and mirrors, and in some cases it works. In most of the cases, it was amazing to see how that small bit affected the whole design sprint, Because instead of just thinking that, we can put all the ideas on the board and people can vote and we can take all three, and then what are we going to do with the next 26? And maybe the best option is first, 16th and 26th. We don't know. You need kind of injection from the real world, and you need to run your ideas through kind of the problems that people see through from their perspective. So that was the big change that we made in London during design sprint wise, and it worked pretty well.
Okay, cool. Some of the other things then, confirmations. You mentioned that you were working on user research studies. You were saying that you were conducting lab studies and field visits and stuff like that, and all kinds of stuff around sort of confirmations, pivot in the action, interruptions, presenting options, and all of these kind of various things. So I'm wondering if we can kind of run through a few of these. So confirmations, what did you mean by confirmations?
It's basically the same example that we just discussed when you said, I want to do something, I said, got it, okay.
Right.
So as soon as, unlike graphic user interfaces, you don't see what's going on, it's even more complicated to understand. It's just me confirming that, you've got it. Right?
So there are lots of options. If someone says to their assistant on their phone or whatever, set a reminder to buy milk on Tuesday, it can go, okay, or it can go, okay, reminder set, or okay, reminder set for Tuesday, or okay, reminder set for Tuesday to buy milk. I will pop up a visual cue and an audio cue at this time in this way, which is right. To different people, different ones might be right, but you'll never know without you researching it, without looking into it. Whereas at the moment, most systems just go with the okay. And how do you trust that? How do you even know what it means?
Take any more complicated example, like from real life. For example, you say, I want to talk to Mike. And the assistant said, I'm placing the call so you can talk to Mike. Maybe it wasn't your intention. Maybe it was, I just want to talk to Mike, remind me about that. Or I want to message him, I want to send him a WhatsApp message or something. So, and that's even not the most complicated bit. The most complicated is when you have an intention and you cannot say in one breath everything you want to say, because this is how most of the system work right now, and this is how people perceive. We've seen so many times when people go to the lab and they say, after a lot of failures, people say, okay, I'll do it right this time. So, remind me tomorrow to call my mom to tell her about this thing, and then I want to send her a text message, and so on and so on. And they pause in the middle because it's just too complicated. And the systems went blank and said, sorry, I don't understand it. Damn, I need to do it again. So how we do it as humans, you just start with anything you want, right? Because you know that I'm flexible enough to understand that. And confirmations in this case doesn't mean that you have a specific strict formula and in this specific place we want to ask confirmation. Confirmation means that we have a network of kind of from you saying anything to you achieving your attention. And the confirmation is at the moment when we are not sure that we actually understand you correctly, we place a sign saying that just confirm that it's correct, or do you want to pivot at this moment? So it's much more complicated than just typical approach taken by most of the products.
And also, just because something has been confirmed, in most systems now, I can't think of any that don't do this, they move on. They just assume you definitely want that, and you can't really change it in that flow. You've confirmed a thing, and then you might go to a human, you might go, oh, actually, no, let's do it. Try doing that with any voice assistant or voice interface. It will just go, I'm sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean by, oh, actually, let's da-da-da? So it doesn't let you re-pivot back around and change that thing. Once you've confirmed, that's it. You're definitely doing this thing.
Like, again, it was another thing that we learned, how flexible and powerful our voice is when two people talk to each other. Think about how you order from the menu in a restaurant. You have a menu with limited options. It's the easiest task possible because you know what to expect. Another person waiting for you to order knows what to expect too. And it's still, what about this thing? I'll probably take this one. Is it vegetarian? No. Okay, I'll switch to something. What about that one? So the interaction flows very unpredictably, and it's very difficult to formalize that. And it's the most simplest example. Let's take any real task from real life. It's much more complicated.
Yeah, that's wicked. What about mental models then of voice assistants and actions? You mentioned mental models. What do you mean by mental models?
So, when we start working with something, we have a very complicated mental model of what it is, what it can do, and what it cannot do. We kind of program to do that. We do it all the time without thinking about that. Like, for example, next time you're on the tube, look at the two people you don't know and think about how would you talk to them. In most of the cases, it will be different way to address them, different topic to talk about. You don't know about anything about them, but you read a lot of subtle clues from how they look, how they behave, how old they are, and so on. So, with any tool, including voice and specifically voice assistants, people start using them with some assumption, expectation, some trust level, and that model is pretty complicated. And that model, in most of the cases, is wrong because they think in front of you it's just a box. They don't know what it is. The existing mental model is created either your previous experience, like for example, you just watched Star Trek. Your expectation can be very high. You can ask anything you want, right? If you just had painful experience of calling your bank when we were told, press 1 if you want to do this, press 2 if you don't want to do it, press 25 and so on. Your expectation is very low.
Yeah.
And that means that the mental model is never correct, and that it's going to hurt your experience, whatever is too low is too high. So one of the most difficult tasks, research and design-wise, when we talk about voice assistant, is to identify where people's expectation is, what exactly they think about the system, and in what instances it's wrong, and how to correct that mental model to actually say, you can say more than what is the age of Barack Obama, because the system is smarter than that, but not smart as to say, tell me something about Barack Obama that I don't know. So how to level that mental model to the exact level that we can support with the system, so people are not frustrated that it doesn't work, and at the same time they use the full functionality of the thing. It's one of the most difficult tasks, both in research and design.
Your mental model of anything is constantly evolving, but the system itself can help you. It can do things to sort of guide the way you perceive the system. So it's important, if a system can only do certain things, it's important not to do things that make people think it's better, make people think it can do a lot more. That's one way to lose trust instantly. If you make out, one example might be, if you make a voice assistant that's fairly limited, but you make an advert on TV showing it doing loads and loads of stuff, you're not helping, because people come to it with the mental model based on that advert of, I can do all these things. As soon as they try to do them, it radically changes how they perceive the system, and you've lost their trust.
It's exactly what's happening with all the products, because marketing-wise, it looks fantastic. You look there, you watch the TV advertisement, and it says, Alexa, tell me a joke, and it tells you a joke which sometimes is funny. So your expectation is, as soon as the voice is natural, your expectation is that it's like talking to a person. So your expectation is the intelligence of the person who can tell this joke, and it's not even close. So by doing that, they actually break the user mental model, and the only thing they guarantee is that when you do something useful for you and important for you, you are going to be frustrated.
So now we are going to take a closer look at the UX lab in a box. We're going to have a little bit of a live demo. We'll show you the unit, we'll show you it all up and running, we'll show you the setup, and Konstantin can take us all through it.
So basically, as we said, the whole idea was born when we conducted voice studies, because the research lab must be so flexible to reflect everything of what's going on in the lab, and we started to think about what can be done. And we conducted research on researchers, and we identified both trends what's happening with research right now, and issues that most of researchers have, and the lab was born. So it's a second version. It took us about 2 years to create that thing. and it's a box that contains everything. All the cameras, all the connectors, everything you need is just in one box. It's one power plug. You connect the thing, and in about 10 minutes you can convert any space, it can be any room or a corner in a cafe, for example, to the best UX labs in the world. So it works almost fully automatically on the lab side, and on the researcher side we simplified everything as much as we can. So there are several things that researchers need to do with the video. The first one is when we plan the study, we need to think about what exactly we're going to share after that, about having the video material that is representative and convincing to the product team. And we automated everything to have everything rendered on the fly. So when you press the stop button at the end of the study, your video file is ready. You can start sharing it with your team. You can broadcast live through a private YouTube channel, for example. That means that at the end of the study, you can add deep links to the video. So you can say, at this specific moment, this has happened, and you can do it literally in the next minute when your study is over. I can give a couple of examples how it actually works.
Yeah.
So when you can start your study with saying that I want to let's take a new one. I want to start with a study with opening title, and the opening title would be VUX World. Just recently we updated the lab to meet a lot of GDPR requirements. Like, for example, you can say that in your company there's a policy to delete all the user videos in 90 days. You can specify both the policy here, and if the policy is should be applied for this specific video. And it will show you on the screen that the lab should be deleted at this specific date. It's just one of the examples of how GDPR should be not just a part of your procedure, how you conduct studies. It should be a part of the infrastructure as well, because most of the artifacts that we create as researchers, they do contain the personal information, so we need to take care of that too. So the next thing is that you create a workflow for your study. You say that I want to start with interviewing the participant, and all the cameras are color coded. This is a green camera connected with a green cable that goes to the green input in the lab, which name is green, and it's green on the controlling device here on the tablet. So you can say, I want to start with interviewing the participant, and it is green, just that, it's green. So then I'm going to ask the participant about the device they're using, and it's yellow. So we said it's green and yellow, and I want picture in picture, and yellow is the most important. I want the device. Then you want to say that I want to talk to the participant and I want a larger view. Then we have another camera which is blue there in the corner. And you say I want green and blue, and I want them side by side. So green, blue, side by side. Done. And then in the end you can say that I want to see everything. So I want to see participant, which is green, I want to see the device, yellow, and I want to see how participants interact with the device, with their top camera, which is red, picture in picture. So this is your flow for your study. You prepare everything. You can even introduce the participant. You can say that I want the participants be introduced like user 4. Again, that helps GDPR a lot, because you don't need to think on the fly about what to say about the participant. And it's Android user. Well, in this case, it's iPhone user. iPhone. Okay, so our study is ready. We bring our participant and we say we sit them at the desk and we say we want to start recording the study. You can both record and broadcast on YouTube. As soon as you click the button, it's live on YouTube on the private channel. We start with the opening slide. It shows what the study is about. Then we can switch to interviewing our participant. And
so essentially, what you've got there then, for those of you listening on the podcast, what we have is essentially a front end that's allowed you to essentially kind of pick the different views that you want to use throughout the entire study. Is that right? That's what you're kind of pre-prepared there, with all the different cameras you want to mix together and stuff.
So basically it's all views, all combinations of all views of from all multiple cameras and multiple devices that you think you will need during the study. You can create a couple of them just in case. And all you take during the study to switch between them is just a click of a button. And you immediately see the response on the screen. Everything is recorded and rendered on the fly automatically, and it's being recorded both on board in the box and can be recorded live on any cloud platform as well. So, like for example, one of the biggest issues we saw, especially with voice studies, is when we want to switch from using one device to another one. In this case, it's just a click of a button. You click a button and you can see people using their phone in real time, and we have the screen shared on this on the large screen, and we can see the participant using the device. If we want to switch to something else, let's say we want to switch back to interviewing the person, we just press the button and it's the person again. If we want to see multiple sources at the same time, this is we found the most useful view for both voice and mobile studies. You want to see the screen in high resolution. You want to see what participant is doing, and we want to see their hands, because in many cases people think with their hands. They don't do anything, but they say like, I would click, no, not here, I would click here, and nothing happens. So if you just record the screen is not enough. We need to see both their facial reaction, what they do with their hands, and how the device reacts to that. And at the end of the study, we switch to the slide again, and we know exactly when to delete the video, we know what the video is about. So half a year later, instead of having hundreds of files where just participants talking about something, you have the all information about what the study is about, when it was conducted, by whom, when the video needs to be deleted, and it's automatic. You don't need to do anything.
Yeah. Fantastic. Wicked. Thank you very much, guys, for that. That was absolutely epic. That was such an interesting episode. Thank you for setting the time aside to speak to me. Where can people find out more about UX Study if they want to either build a lab or they want to do some kind of in-the-field research? Where can they find out more about UX Study, and where can they find out more about yourselves?
So they can check our website, ux-study.com. We're the same on Twitter, and then my personal Twitter is @AdamGBanks.
Cool. Konstantin?
Please follow me at Konstantin Samoylov, and if you want to try a lab or thinking about just updating or building a lab, please talk to us. We're happy to help.
And you also sell the UX Lab boxes as well, do you?
It's a system we use ourselves, and it's also a system that's for sale. You'll find a lot of these in lots of companies all over the UK in use as the heart of their UX system.
Cool, fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Nice one.
Thanks a lot.